This person got this close to this scene. So this is really in the thick of it. They get that close to that commotion. I mean, I'd be bloody pegging it. Now that I know the context, I'm going to look at this and I will think of... Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else, welcome to my video. My name is Sam McHale-North, and today I'm going to be looking at the world's best photojournalism in 2020. So the whole premise behind this video is that I'm going to be looking at the nominees for the Photo of the Year contest held by the World Press Photo Organization, and I'm going to look at the pictures and try and tell you what's going on. But the catch is, I don't know what the story is, and I only get to read the headline. Now, the reason that I thought this would be a good idea for a video is because I listened to a podcast called Citations Needed, which examines media narratives done by two really smart and interesting guys in New York. Give it a listen, I'll put a link down in the description. And one of the facts that they pulled out of one of their episodes was that 60% of all people who read news articles only read the headline and look at the first photo. The other 40%, the rest, they start reading the rest of the article. But as the article is read, that number dwindles. So only a few percentage of people actually read the full story. Never mind like reading all the articles on one story. That could be just one article on one huge story, because as we all know, our attention spans are shrinking. But anyway, enough gabbering. Let's get into this and have a look at the world's best photos in 2020. I already know that this is a student protest, but I wouldn't have been able to guess it really from having a look at it. Now, the only way that I could have guessed that this is potentially a student protest is if you look at the girl with the pink book and the black book holding in her hand, which says Le Faire Messelie, and I don't know what language is that. I'm not gonna lie. You could maybe guess that they're, academic books potentially. It's just an amazing photograph, like just from the get-go. The composition's great. It almost looks like a wall with the riot shields. I can't read the writing, so I can't tell you what country it's in. I think what really stands out to me though is all the expressions of the people's faces. You've got that girl who's nearly in tears with the two books in the air, and then you've got the girl next to her with the face mask on looking directly at the camera, and then everybody else in the caps. You can really sense the commotion going on. So this is really in the thick of it. It's obviously, with photojournalism, very little of it is staged. It's not where studio photography or fashion photography. Like, mad respect to the guy or gal who went up to, got in the thick of it. I don't understand how he has got a high angle on this. He's looking down on the police. They're stood on top of something, and then they're down below. So unless it's two walls and the photojournalist is looking down and taking a picture on an opposite wall, and then the students are coming down a funnel or something. This person got this close to this scene, and they're not police, they're not security personnel. They probably don't have self-defense skills. They're just there with a camera and they get that close to that commotion. I mean, I'd be bloody pegging it. So let's have a look at the title.
21st of May 2019. Students scuffle with riot police during an anti-government demonstration in Algiers, Algeria on the 21st of May. Algeria had been embroiled in protests since February. Initially, protests had been aimed at ousting longtime President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, an 81-year-old veteran of Algeria's independence struggle, who had been in ill health and not seen in public for some time. Bouteflika resigned in April, handing over to a military-backed caretaker government, but demonstrations continued. Protesters demanded the cancellation of the presidential elections set to take place on the 4th of July and a return to civilian democracy. They also call for the departure of government officials associated with the Bouteflika administration, including the interim president and prime minister. Protests continued into 2020 without successful resolution.
Looking back at that picture now, and I could have probably now empathise with how angry people were, because whenever things get into politics, you can end up in divides, and if you're in the middle of that divide, you could get hurt. This one's called A Straight Voice. So as we can see, there's a lot of people in the darkness, and I don't know why they're in the dark. They could be in a cave of some sort, they could be in a mine, I've got no idea, but there's a lot of cameras and phones out, so they're all filming it, so it's an event. He put his hand up to his chest like he's doing something in solidarity, or they're singing. The young lad on the left of him, he's smiling, and people have got their hands in the air, so it could be a celebration. I assume the title comes from how the young guy in the middle is looking directly at the camera and he's chanting outwards. He looks like he's the only person doing it. The thing that I'm trying to get at is how, taken in isolation, these pictures, you might not get a lot, but the more you peel back the details and the layers of the story that surrounds the picture, there's the context of the picture, I think then it becomes more powerful. I think photography and art in general can have an effect based on how much time you put into it. Some pieces of art, the more time you put into it, the more dull it gets, where some pieces of art, you can put loads more time. The more time and effort you put into it and understanding it, the more you get out of it.
19th of June 2019. A young man illuminated by mobile phones recites protest poetry while demonstrators chant slogans calling for civilian rule during a blackout in Khartoum, Sudan, on the 19th of June. Protests had begun in the eastern city of Atbara in December 2018, reportedly against the tripling of the price of bread, but then broadened in focus and had spread rapidly throughout the country. By April 2019, protesters were staging a sit-in close to army headquarters in the capital Khartoum and demanding an end to the 30-year rule of dictator Omar al-Bashir. On the 11th of April, al-Bashir was removed from office in a military coup, and a transitional military government was established. Protests continued, calling for power to be handed to civilian groups. On the 3rd of June, government forces opened fire on unarmed protesters. Scores of people were killed, and many more subject to further violence. 3 days later, the African Union suspended Sudan in the midst of a widespread international condemnation of the attack. The authorities sought to defuse protests by imposing blackouts and shutting down the internet. Protesters communicated by text message, word of mouth, and using megaphones, and resistance to military rule continued. Despite another severe crackdown on the 30th of June, the pro-democracy movement was eventually successful in signing a power-sharing agreement with the military on the 17th of August.
That changes this picture a lot. Now we know what the story is and we actually have a resolution for the story. Now that I know the context, I'm going to look at this and I will think of the success of the struggles that the people found themselves in to get a democratic government. Shame is an understatement for how people are dying in other countries to have something that here in the UK and the US and other nations already have. And you can kind of tell that there's a sense of celebration. You have got some smiles on the face of the people there, but you've also got looks of concern and hands up in the air. I thought this was going to be in a cave or something. I don't know why, because I think it's probably just the night sky actually. It's just that dark because they had that blackout and they had the internet taken away, which makes sense now because you look at all the cameras and all the phones, that's what they were using to communicate, through text, through megaphones, and simply through voice. Third picture. It's called Awakening. This one's a portrait. It seems to me there's a little bit of symmetry going on, which I really like. You've got both I'm going to say parents. I don't know, I'm assuming that the parents putting the hands on the child. You've got them kind of coming in there onto his shoulders, resting their hands on equal sides. And then you've got them leaning on, I don't know what it is behind them, the chair, leaning on something behind them in both of this manner. So it's kind of got a symmetrical look. I think her gaze is really powerful, the way she's looking directly at the camera. A couple of things I want to point out. She's got I don't know what the medical term is, but she's got the tube going up her nose and stuck to her face, and she's in a wheelchair. You can see in the bottom left corner of the image that it's the wheel of a wheelchair, and she's resting a right forearm on the wheelchair. So something's happened to her. And it's called Awakening, so I would assume that she may have been in a coma, I mean, you look at her face, it's a somewhat of a blank stare. It's not one full of expression or emotion. That's my guess anyway. She's been in a coma and she's come out now and she's finally awakened. The last thing I want to point out is a necklace. It says Ava. I think it says Ava, but that could be a name or it could say something else. So now I'm going to read the description of it so we can actually understand the context behind the photo.
Iwa, a 15-year-old Armenian girl who has recently woken from a catatonic state brought on by resignation syndrome, sits in a wheelchair, flanked by a parent, in a refugee reception centre in Podkowa, Lesna, Poland. Resignation syndrome, or RS, renders patients passive, immobile, mute, unable to eat and drink, incontinent and unresponsive to physical stimulus. It affects psychologically traumatised children in the midst of lengthy asylum processes and seems most common in Roma and Yazidi children, as well as those from the Balkans. It was first noted in the late 1990s and was thought to be confined to Sweden, though cases have since been reported in the offshore refugee detention centre run by the Australian government in Nauru. Remission and gradual return to normal function occurs after life circumstances improve. Iwa succumbed to RS while her family were trying for asylum in Sweden and threatened with deportation back to Poland, which had been their first country of first arrival as refugees. They feared being sent back to Armenia. The family was deported to Poland despite Iwa's illness, but she recovered 8 months after they arrived.
What you don't get in the picture, what you do in that context, is how they have been displaced, how they've been moved from one country to another, and how they've been blocked. They say the eyes are the mirror of the soul and everything. Her blank look, looking straight at the camera, I think it's quite powerful, the way that you can read whatever you want out of her facial expression. It's very blank. The hands are caring, which I could tell. Really sad and poignant picture. I think what's interesting also is black and white. I don't know why it's black and white. It could be just the photographer's preference, but I think it also has a kind of historical feeling to it that this is something, like this is a marker, that this is important, that this is something to be marked within history. And I think right now, with the people say refugee crisis, but we've had so many refugee crises in the last 2 decades. Very rarely do we get that human experience of refugees. So often in the way we cover media in the UK and the US and everywhere else, really, it's like they're faceless masses. They're just numbers, statistics, and you never really get the personal story or narrative that each of these refugees, these humans, have at the end of the day. So I think this is a really great photograph. Injured Kurdish fighter receives hospital visit. So obviously he's been severely burnt, the guy in the bed. And you can see how his skin, if you look at his chest, the skin on his chest and the colour of that compared to skin on his cheek, it's now pink. Like he's like, it's like me when I'm sunburnt, and I'm not trying to diminish it, but that's what I look like. And then the skin around him has got darker because of, I think he's been burnt. I did first aid years ago, and they say use cling film. I think, don't quote me, don't take medical advice from me, but use cling film to help the burning, or maybe they tell you not to. Maybe that is just his skin, and his skin's gone yellow from the burn, whatever it is. It could have been a chemical burn, it could have been any kind of burn, but it's certainly a burn. And if you look on his left armpit, you've got, it looks like almost like moisturiser, something to like cool his arm down. What I haven't spoken about yet is the girl there. She could be younger or she could be a similar age. He just looks older though because of his injury. What is becoming a consistent theme in all this is that the human connection, there's a human connection in these pictures, in these ones which have been nominated as the single photo of the year of 2020. You see the human connection in the hands. You've got the hands connecting and she's looking away, looking outside at something, and he's looking at her. So it could be maybe love, what is going, maybe they're a couple, but she's definitely preoccupied thinking about something. Most likely the conflict while he's lovingly looking at her. You've got all the food and bits and bobs at the side, and right at the corner you can see the bottles of water. This might sound daft, but it makes me think that their water's not running. Like, things aren't going to plan. If you've got to use like bottled water to drink water. You're on the move, or there isn't clean water, running water. And in society, in like civilization, we have, you have clean water, running water. But when war breaks out, all these things that we take for granted, that we live our lives on, kind of stop. So maybe she's not looking at him because she's so shocked and taken aback by his injury. Obviously, I don't know what he looks like from before, but he probably looks very different to her. Maybe that's the reason why she's looking away, not because she's distracted, but she can't bear to look at him.
20th of October 2019. Ahmed Ibrahim, 18, an SDF fighter badly burned in conflict with Turkish forces, is visited by his girlfriend at a hospital in Al-Hasaka on the 20th of October. She had been at first unable to enter the room, as she was horrified by his injuries, but a nurse encouraged her to go in to hold Ahmed's hand and have a short conversation. By early 2019, the territory held by the Islamic State group IS in Syria had reduced to a 4 square kilometre patch in the southeast, centred on the village of Baghous. The IS retreat from northern Syria had been under the onslaught of the combined militias of the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, led by the Kurdish People's Protection Units, YPG, and supported by an international coalition of primarily US troops. As IS drew back, tens of thousands of people emerged from the enclave, many of them the wives and children of foreign IS fighters. Numerous IS fighters themselves surrendered or were captured. The Kurds were left with the conundrum what to do with so many prisoners, many of them under the age of 18 and orphaned or separated from their families. Then, at the beginning of October, US President Donald Trump ordered US troops out of northern Syria. On October 9th, Turkey, which had long seen Kurdish forces on its border as a security threat given the decades-long Kurdish insurgency against Turkey, invaded northern Syria, aiming to end Kurdish control over the territory. As Kurdish forces refocused their attention on a new opponent, the fate of the many thousands of prisoners grew even more uncertain.
So it's only professionalism with me here, so I forgot to talk about my impressions of the photo after I found out the context regarding Ivor Prickett's photo of the Kurdish fighter. What I first noticed was that the worried look on the girl's face, on his girlfriend's face, the way she's looking outside, it kind of evokes the idea that there's another conflict on the horizon, which there is. He was badly burnt in a battle with the Turkish, as there's been long feuds going on with the Kurdish and the Turkish. Now, before that, he was fighting ISIS in Syria with a coalition of international troops, mainly comprised of US troops. So, to the West, he would be maybe considered a hero, yet here he is being burnt by another conflict, by the Turkish. So we've got the girl looking outside, and that evokes the idea that we've got more conflict on the horizon. The second thing that I noticed was the blocking of the people within the frame. So I noticed that the girl who stood next to him, his girlfriend, is blocking him from the rest of the room, trapping him in the corner, which gives us the idea that he is trapped within this conflict. So whether that was intentional or not by photographer Ivor Prickett, I don't know, but it's very well done and it's quite poetic in that way. Another thing that I noticed, which is more regarding the description, but it also links to the photo, is how kind of empathetic it is. And I think a lot of these pictures are empathetic. They're all trying to talk about nuanced issues that aren't really discussed in the mainstream. Another thing that shocked me was that how Ahmed is 18 years old, that he's so young. But also what shocked me was how the prisoners that they took after the conflict were similar age to him, very young. The ISIS fighters were 18, orphaned, separated from their families, and it kind of paints this desperate picture. And I really recommend that you guys listen to a podcast, the Peabody Award-winning podcast in 2018 called Caliphate by Rukmini Callimachi and Andy Mills, who both work for the New York Times. And I implore you all to check out the rest of Ivor Prickett's work, especially his work on ISIS files, which was done by Rukmini Callimachi and actually influenced and the direction of the podcast Caliphate. And his pictures are mind-blowing, how close he gets to some of the conflict. There's a picture of him It must be only a few feet. ISIS had burnt an oil field and it's just going up in smoke, and it's really intense stuff, and all the pictures are done by him pretty much. It's unbelievable work. So that one's done. Let's move on to the next one.